Hello, welcome. Today we're talking about the quest of delivering software value. But just before we jump into anything, let me introduce myself. I am Manu. I'm an engineer, been technical person on Java and Android since 2000. 2006, I kind of discovered this passion for agile methodology and helping teams to improve the ways of working. So I kind of call myself a delivery optimizer, or I like to think that I try to support teams and organizations to improve end-to-end how they deliver value. I moved to the UK from Italy in 2014, so I'm a Britalian. If they keep me, we'll see, 31 of October. At the moment, I am an Agile Delivery Manager in Babylon Health. I actually quite happy to to work for a company that has a mission that really resonates with me. So improving healthcare and make it modern, ready for modern times. We are hiring at the moment in our London office, but as you see, the mission is global, and we are on our way to expand. So, right. So for any Italian moving to London, just so that you know, it's a myth that pineapple on pizza is good. You'll see these myths along the presentation. Okay, so why we are here? We are talking about how do we go from concept to cash? There are many ways. There is possibly not the perfect way or the right way, but I want to touch today on a few key points, a few key concepts that are sometimes left out of the normal conversation around Scrum or Kanban, which are more focused on one part of the whole cycle. So to me, the three main things are: how do we build the right thing that the customers and stakeholders will love? How do we build it in the right way? And how do we do all this at the right pace? I'm not saying as fast as possible, because I don't think that's necessarily the best way. So today we're touching on these few points. I will deep dive in some of them more, and some of them we will just mention. So setting the goals, Inception, story generation, forecasting, how to kick off a new team or a team that is not new but working on some new product increment or new feature, build and ship, this I will just mention because it's not the scope of this presentation, and how do we bring this all back in a feedback loop. Okay, so I wanted to ask a question. I'm not sure if I'll be able to see your hands, but can you raise your hand if you thinking of the last product increment or feature, big feature product that you developed? Can you raise your hand if you think you were not really sure why you were building that, and you were not sure if when it went live, it actually was successful? How many? Okay. 7, 8 people. Now raise your hand if you knew why you were building this, you actually knew if the feature was successful, but you're not particularly happy about the solution, how it was actually done. Okay, again, 8, 10 people. And can you raise your hand if you think that, sure, the solution was really good, customer happy, you know why you were doing that, but it was really, really stressful, and in certain times it was a bit of a death match. Okay, not too many, good. 4 or 5 people. So, okay, so this is the whole menu. Now we're talking about setting goals. Okay, so why I think it's important to set goals? Some numbers, 50% of the managers, the leadership in a company, only 50% of them, they can name 1 out of 5 company priorities. Also, 32% of employees in the US and worldwide, only 13% are engaged in their job. I put these two sets of data together because I do believe that they are connected. Right, so there are many goal-setting frameworks. I'm gonna just touch upon one that I've used a few times and that I felt was really useful. It's OKRs, Objective and Key Results. It was proposed originally in Intel and then used extensively by Google, LinkedIn, and other companies. What is it? It's a goal-setting framework where you define an objective. This is what we want to achieve. That usually is kind of inspirational and qualitative in nature and broad. But then attached to that goal, to that objective, you have a key result. So this is how we're going to measure if we are moving towards that goal. And the two things are connected in the OKR. One example. Uber, I don't know if any of you know this is kind of a famous napkin photo that was tweeted by one of the investors in Uber. It kind of highlights the strategy. I'm not gonna go into that much, but basically one goal was to increase the driver base to drive the rest of the loop. So how would we phrase an OKR on this? Well, the objective is increase the drivers in the system, and the key results, usually you have 2 or 3 key results per goal, is increase the driver base in each region by 20%, and increase the driver average session to 26 hours weekly in all the active regions. So as you can see, what you should see in the KRs is numbers. You want to see something there where you can say, you can measure, you can say, I am 30% there. I'm moving towards that, achieving that key result, while the objective is more inspirational. Okay, so why I think that the OKRs are actually really helpful in driving all the quality in the following phases, because they kind of force you to think about the real important goals, letting everything else out of the discussion. They are a very good communication tool, and they're supposed to be transparent and discussed across the organization. And also they embed into the goal the measuring system. So it's not just about having a goal, it's about knowing every time throughout the process where you are compared to that goal. How are you scoring? And so it's a strong communication and alignment tool that is supposed to be viewed and shared and reviewed across the whole organization. So any of you heard of or read this book, Drive, What Makes Team Engaged and Motivated? Can you raise your hands? 1, 2, 3, few. Yeah, so in this book that I really recommend, there's a lot of data and studies back in this. There are 3 main factors motivating teams: being autonomous, being able to master what to do, being able to get better what to do, and purpose. Why am I doing this after all? So the OKRs are already a tool at the start of when you even don't know what you're going to build, but you're just thinking, what are the goals that I have? It's a tool that allows you to have purpose, because the goal is telling you, this is why we're going to build something or do something. But it also allows autonomy, because it's not a shopping list. It's not the business coming to you saying, you're going to build this feature, this feature, this feature, but it's the business saying, this is what we want to achieve. And ideally, the team will come up with what they think they should be building to achieve those goals. So it kind of touches on 2 of the 3 main factors that make team engaged and performant. Okay, once you have good goals, shared, agreed, clear, measurable by definition, the OKR is by definition a measurable goal, you go into Inception. Now, this terminology can be different, and I don't know if you use this terminology. By Inception, I mean the phase where you start from your goal and say, fine, given these goals, what is it that we need to do? What are the things we're going to build or the assumption we're going to make? And it encapsulates the design. If you were in the previous session by Gary, he kind of deep dive really well into the design sprint from Google. So that in this, what I'm referring to, this is included in the Inception phase. Okay, a few tips also. What should be part of this Inception? So what really worked well, I did just recently a 2-week Inception in Babylon Health with one of my team, is asking who are our stakeholders? Who are the people that have a stake in this project or product increment? So one thing that I found really useful is to kind of have a workshop or a session with the team where you say, okay, if we have on a dimension the interest of the stakeholders, and on another dimension I have the power of those stakeholders, the power to influence what I'm going to do, you can have like 4 categories of those stakeholders, and you can start mapping them into these quadrants. Now, I'm not going to dwell much on the 3, the meet their needs, least important, and show consideration. But I just want to say, for the key players, which are the stakeholders that have a lot of interest in what you're about to do, and also a lot of power and influence in what you'll be doing, definitely worth knowing who they are and involve them early in all the decision and in the Inception phase itself. Okay. One thing, someone was mentioning in the previous talk, like, what about facilitation for a design sprint? Yes, it is crucial, depending on the size of the team, the number of people you involved. But of course, you want to involve a certain number of people because that's where you get ideas. You might want to brainstorm, but at the same time, you don't want to, end up losing your track throughout the session. So you do need a facilitator, but also I found that having personas is really helping you to ask yourself, who is actually waiting for this feature? There are statistics that say that like 55% of the features in a product are actually never used. So these are a very strong tool to kind of focus. So what I've used in the last Inception that I've run is a very, very simple persona. There are many templates. You can Google, you can search them online. But I really kept it simple, and it was a photo, a name, role or goal, what they want to do, what skills do they have, and what are the frustrations. And then where you go into the problem space and then in the solution space of these personas. Right, an example to make it more concrete. So this is actually something that I've used in the last Inception. So Dave is a production support person. His skills are, of course, troubleshooting, scripting, tooling, and the frustration is he wastes a lot of time in manual support that could be automated. Also managing, data, without a tool, it can be risky, can be frustrating, can be slow. And of course, you want to then bring the conversation of what would make Dave's life better. What should we build to make Dave's life better? Right. So one that is a bit less, less conventional, maybe a bit funnier, is the Princess Leia from Star Wars. So the frustration is, well, the Empire destroyed their home planet, and the Death Star, like, she doesn't have an idea on how to manage that. So we, when we go into the problem space, we should really think, what can we do to, help Leia, Princess, with the frustration and achieve her goals. Okay, so I kind of touched already upon this, but I really found that apart from having a facilitator in the discussion during the Inception, the user's personas really drive the conversation. Like, if you define them beforehand, it really brings the topic back onto why are we even talking about this? Who are we trying to satisfy here? Whose need are we trying to satisfy with this software or this feature? So it really brings back on the focusing on the needs of the customer. It brings back the emphasis on the user experience, and it really drives an optimal design. By optimal design, I mean the design that is needed to achieve all the needs and solve all the problems of the customer without doing any gold plating or doing anything that is not necessary or overcomplicated. Okay, so that was just in the session before. If you dig into the design domain, there's a lot. It's very structured. There's a book that you can consult and read. I really recommend it. But basically, even if you don't follow the design sprint structure by Google, as part of the Inception, you should really have whiteboarding, sketching, maybe prototyping, and start to moving from, these are the personas, these are their goals and frustration, what is it that we can build to achieve their satisfaction? And of course, it's connected to the goals, the OKRs that you have. Okay, other stuff that I've used, but I'm not gonna really dig into this. An elevator pitch is something that it's kind of nice, especially if you have stakeholders external to the team to present what you think is your main proposition or your main differentiator, compared to other solutions. Key product principles, especially in my case, in my Inception, we wanted to make sure we didn't forget about non-functional requirements like security, scalability. And so the question was, what are these requirements that are so important to us in our product? So this is something we kind of documented and put on a wall throughout the whole Inception. Any other data that you can think of to answer the question, am I building the right thing? Is that actually what is solving the problem? Is that the real problem? Okay, I took this out as a separate topic, but for us it was actually part of the Inception phase. Now that so I know who I am building this software for, I know their pain points, I have some kind of high-level solution in my mind. How do I go to the backlog? Or how do I go to stories or tasks that can be brought into a sprint if you're working in Scrum or anyway in a board if you're working with Kanban. So anyone of you has ever used the story mapping exercise? 1, 2, 3. Okay. So for people that didn't use that, I really found this tool to be really, really effective. In my experience, it's a workshop that is really collaborative, and it really helps to visualize the whole solution. And it's an alignment tool. You have 2 dimensions in this visualization of the stories. One is the, let's say, big capability that gets broken down into smaller tasks and then user stories. And the other dimension is milestones. We'll see that in a second. Again, very recommended book on user story mapping. But let's see an example again and how this might be built. So imagine that you want to build a new capability in your mobile app and is finding a product. That could be, so the find product is actually a goal. It should be connected to your OKRs. Then a capability is browse through the product category tree. And this is one. You could have another one that is search by name. But for the moment, we're just going down into this one. So this one gets broken down into user tasks. So things that the user needs to do to actually be able to browse through the category tree. And it could be select the category, view the product list below that category, and then choose a product to view in that list. And then you start thinking, okay, what are the things I need to build? What could be the user stories that allows the user to do those tasks, to perform those tasks? So for example, to select the product category, one item of work is I need to build that category navigation. This is below the product list for a selected category. You have, I'm not going to go through them, but you have several stories. And same for this. So, and then you go first horizontal, so you talk about all your goals and then all your user capabilities and then all your user tasks, and then you go down. So you first go horizontal and you only dig down once you have the whole picture horizontally. And then you start thinking, what is the minimum thing that we can build that will deliver some value? Value is a very broad word, and value for you could be customer value, could be having some reassurance, like in terms of mitigating the risk, technical risk maybe, getting feedback of any sort to see if you are on the right track. So maybe you shuffle these stories and then you define, okay, M0, milestone 0 will be only these 3 user stories, and then milestone 1, and then milestone 2. And this is what you do. Now, how to run it? Ideally, the whole team is there. You want to have skills from different backgrounds, so you want engineers, testers, representative from the business, designers, marketing. So it should be a diverse group to do this mapping. Definitely invite the key players in the stakeholders domain, because they will have an opinion. They want to shape the product, so they need to be part of this so that they know that their voice is being heard. You can do it on a wall, stickies or index cards on a wall. Or if you have a remote team, you can use stories on board. That's what I've used, but I guess there are several tools. As I said, just go horizontally first. So first explore all the user capabilities that you want to add or change. Then break it down into user tasks, and then stories. And then at the end, milestone lanes. So as I mentioned when I mentioned design, when is whiteboarding and solutionizing also coming into place? Well, it can be before this to give some input to the session. It can be during, on the same workshop, and it would be after too, right? The diagram that I built at the start that was very sequential. We know that in the agile space or in any complex space where there's a lot of uncertainty is not really sequential. So do as much as you need that will drive the conversation better. Okay, so the benefits of these are you get out of this workshop with a visual of the whole. You have a lot of alignment. User personas should drive the conversation throughout the workshop in terms of, are we really building this for this persona? Do they really need that? It will help you identify some gaps in your analysis and really focus on the priority when you start saying, is this milestone 0? Is that really the minimum that we can do? And there might be conversation around, milestone 0 could be do the hardest or trickiest thing first to reduce the risk, technical risk, build a prototype of the end-to-end solution to see if it actually works in milestone 0. And overall, this tool really helps to focus on what is really important and avoid waste. Another myth. So in many situations I've been, you hear, okay, we have an MVP, it's going to be the next 6 months. So I just want to say, having a small MVP is really difficult. I'm aware of that, but it's really worth trying to have something really small to get feedback early. If you've seen the session before where you can use every tool, prototyping, even 3D printing to get some feedback on how the solution is going to look like. Try everything because it's really worth it. And MVP, minimum viable product, is a really confusing name because actually it doesn't have necessarily to be a product to be an MVP, you actually don't have to build anything. You're not forced to. It could be a landing page or a mailing list where you actually find the cheapest or quickest way to answer the question. And the question is this a good idea worth building, right? Finding the answer to this question is actually the MVP. Right, forecasting. I found this to be most of the time a controversial topic because many people say, well, but isn't Agile about being unpredictable? Isn't you just build something, you are iterative, you shouldn't be giving any dates and stuff. So from my point of view, there is some truth to this, but of course the reality is not in the extremes. Most of the times you need to answer a question from the business, from the stakeholders saying, when are we getting value out of this, right? And it's not about setting a fixed date, it's going to be ready at 6 p.m. of the 19th of December, but it's about saying, well, it's going to fall more or less in that month. And it's supposed to be a dynamic forecast. Of course, at the start of building something, you have a lot of uncertainty, but you still can build some sort of forecasting and then make it better and more accurate along the way. So one way that I found really, really useful to build a forecast without spending much time, because, in a way, estimating work is it's a kind of waste. So you want to get some value out of that, but don't spend too much time. So I found this affinity estimation technique very, very effective. So how does it work? You just put the card, all the stories that you have out of the story mapping that you've done, divided by milestones, into cards, and then you put a pile of those cards, and you build a wall like that with 5 columns, extra small, small, medium, large, very large, and NFC, which is I have no idea. And then you make a queue of the people in the team. The people in the room. They will be the team building this solution, and the first person can take the first card from the pile and put it in the wall where they believe it should belong, like medium. The second person can do the same. So pick something, put it on the wall, or they can actually change what they see on the wall. So I don't agree it's a medium. For me, it's a large. Every time a card gets moved between columns, you put a dot on it just to say it has been moved. And if it gets moved a lot of times, there's a lot of uncertainty, and you might want to park it if the conversation takes a lot of time. So you do this till you've actually finished all the stories, and they are sized according to this high-level T-shirt sizing. In my experience, I never found a situation where you actually, even with very opinionated teams, very vocal teams, it never took more than half an hour to estimate 35 stories. And the good thing is that the relative sizing is accurate, because you can see, okay, what about that story in medium? Is it actually bigger than the one in small? Is it actually smaller than the one in large? And what matters is the relative sizing. So I found this technique that I've been using, recently in the last couple of years, actually, very good, because it's collaborative and inclusive. So you don't have to say, estimation is time-consuming, so we'll just take 2 people in the room so that we don't waste engineers' time. But actually, then you'll have more uncertainty on the estimation, because you want to have all the team involved. So it's collaborative, but it's also fast, and still, even if it's fast, it's still really reliable, and it's also somehow fun if you can make it in physically with paper. If you can't, you can use columns in a Trello board, or even make a Jira board to create the columns. Right, so once you have done that, then you are finally able to forecast. So a forecast is not an estimation in the sense that it's supposed to provide a picture of what you know at the moment that will tell this milestone will be done in this month. So what you see is the graph changes according to the velocity, right? So every sprint, if your velocity is different from what you expected, you will update this and give new forecast, a new updated forecast. And also, if you, as is usually the case, when you go into the iterations of your work and you refine your stories more, you might find that you break them down, you might find the estimation is actually bigger than you thought, or maybe you descope something and you actually have less work. So all those, the amount of work in each of those milestones will also change. So the changes of these two factors will make your forecast dynamic, and it will be as reliable as possible given the information you have at that moment. So one thing that I can say about the myth before, right, in Agile we're not fond of the plan. It is true, we're not fond of the plan, but then we are fond of planning, meaning that we don't stick to the same plan when we realize it's not accurate anymore, but we keep planning and updating the plan in an iterative way. Okay, so just one thing I want to share, velocity is not a performance metric. So if you end up using this chart and people say, oh, the velocity is too low, or what does it mean? Last sprint it was 20 points, now is 12. Do I need to worry? It's not about performance. It doesn't measure performance. It's a planning tool, and so focus on the forecast. What it's telling you in terms of this is where it's going to be complete. All right. Kickoff. So for new teams, so if you're building a new product or a big new feature, and the team is also new, but it doesn't have to be entirely true, even if you have new members, I would recommend a kickoff. If the team is absolutely like the same team members, I would still recommend a review of the team. So what would be good to have in a kickoff? So in my experience, it's first of all, if you have new members, just introduce them, make sure that they get to see the faces of their teammates, their roles, and kind of try to create like a good atmosphere. If you have team values, review them. If you don't, there are several exercises and workshops to kind of define what is important for you in the team, and they might be connected to the company values or Scrum values or Agile values. Again, good to know if you have so if it's a new team or not a new team, but you had several conversations about, I'm not sure who should do that, I'm not sure if I should be doing that, I'm not sure about what they do. Good to maybe have a session on roles and responsibilities. There are several workshops that are good to try, where you can define them in a way that is not challenging, it can kind of safe, but it brings a lot of clarity in the ways of working. And then define working agreement in the team. How do we behave with each other? How do we communicate? And I'll mention other stuff regarding the process. So one thing that I really tried recently is this backlog of decisions. Very simple. You just create somewhere, Confluence, whatever, Google Docs. This has been decided in this date, in this event. Good to make sure that we stick to our own decision as a team, or good with those key player stakeholders where they say, oh, you decided to go with this solution, I don't agree at all. And sometimes you might say, well, you were in Inception too, like we discussed this. And that's fine, but it's even more powerful to say, oh, well, let's have a look at the backlog of decision where we decided in this moment, in this date, for these reasons, to go with this decision. Because it's easy to, when you look back at what you decided at that time, it's easy to say, oh, well, that doesn't seem like a good decision. But at that time, it was probably good because you had a different context. So good to document it. I found it very useful. So things to discuss in this kickoff. Again, if you discuss them before, review them. Otherwise, good to discuss how we prepare the work, how do we do refinement, who should be there, how much time, how do we code, build and test our work, code review, policies, what is the process around that, how do we ship, do we have a release manager, is anyone in the team, should anyone in the team be able to release, how do we put that in the normal development cycle, what do we measure? One thing that you definitely should be measuring is the KRs of the OKRs, but then apart from that, if the team is asking, how do we measure if we're getting better, how do we measure our performance, well, that's open for discussion. So good to know what you think you should be measuring. How do we celebrate? These are just examples of what I've used in previous kickoffs. It's not a hard rule. I guess anything you think that will make the start or the start of a new team or the start of a new project better, you can put it in the kickoff. So just a bit of context. Why do I think that the kickoff is actually helping a lot? Because so any of you is familiar with this model? Can you raise your hand? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, few people. So a new team or a team that had some changes recently in the composition, or even a team that is stable but somehow the dynamics change. It goes through these stages: forming, storming, norming, performing. Again, they are not sequential necessarily, and it's not like when you achieve one, you're there. They're dynamic. But the thing is that if you have a new team on a new product, it's kind of sure that you are in the forming stage. It will be hard to learn how to work with each other. There's a lot of unknown in many domains. So how do you help the team to get to the performing stage? Well, the kickoff is a good way to kind of eliminate some uncertainty around how we work, and of course the Inception also eliminates some uncertainty around what you're supposed to build, who are you building it for, why, and these are the main questions. Right. So then you go into the first sprint or iteration or whatever you want to call it, milestone. In that there will be some foundation work, there will be some spikes to further mitigate the risks. It's very difficult, I find. It's very rare that you end up an inception or a design sprint or both, and then in the first sprint you know exactly what you're supposed to do. You still have a lot of uncertainty. So the sprint 0 is kind of a bit of an unusual one. My suggestion there is even more, just because it's an unusual one, don't skip the sprint goal, right? So you won't maybe have working software at the end, maybe, but still you can set up yourself a goal saying at the end, this thing that we don't know, we will know them, and you can demo the spikes, you can demo the knowledge that you acquired, you can demo a reviewed version of your architecture. So still good to have a goal to avoid, going, drifting for several sprints or weeks with the uncertainty of the first phase. Okay, so I'm not saying much on the build because there are frameworks. There is Scrum, there is Kanban, there is XP. So this is not specifically the topic of this talk because I just wanted to connect the dots in all the other phases. I just want to say again, another myth. I've heard a lot of Kanban is easier than Scrum because Scrum it's hard because we can't plan at this stage, or Kanban is better because it doesn't have meetings. So I just want to say these are two different frameworks that are great, both, and they both have advantages and disadvantages. So apply critical thinking. But then one thing that I want to say is if you're moving to Kanban because you think that Scrum is hard, there's a high chance that you will find that Kanban is hard or harder. So my suggestion here is not a good reason to move to Kanban because Scrum is not really working well. So first understand what is not working and know what is not working and try to make it work. And then you can consider other frameworks. And you can mix and match, but Without the recipe, you need to be a good cook. Now we're closing back, feedback loop and manage expectation. So one thing that I really would recommend is, especially if you couldn't break down your MVP and you're supposed to work for months before you actually have something that you can demo or showcase or give to the customer. So if you are in that situation, it's really risky. It's really risky because you could have your architecture might not scale and you only know it later. You might have unforeseen problem. You might have the customer simply saying, this is not what I wanted. So really, really try to avoid going dark for months. If you can't give your product to a real customer, then come up with user testing, internal testing, beta channels, try everything that you can to get some feedback. Regularly, if you're using Scrum, the iteration, the sprint is a good way. If you're using another framework, just set an iteration and stop and review your progress on your OKRs. So if you want to increase the number of drivers in the system by 20%, you should be able after 2 months to say, how much have I increased it now? Is it 10% more? Fine, I'm on the right way. Is it not changing at all? Okay, what does it mean? Maybe I need to do something differently, or maybe the goal was even wrong in the first place, right? But it needs to be discussed, it needs to be reviewed, because the KR will drive what you're doing. Again, the forecast should be updated continuously, because at the start is really, really uncertain, and it gets better, while you dig into the work, and you actually get to gain knowledge about what you're doing, and keep highlighting risks to the leadership and the stakeholders to manage their expectations. Showcase as much work as you can. Again, if your project or for any reason is not really user-facing, then come up with creative ideas to show value. Technical work is also valuable, and you just need to be a bit more creative to come up with a good way to show that value. And yes, I think David before, when he was in his session about leadership, he was saying about retro. Make sure one of the 3 takeaways was have your retro. Yes, I'm also saying as part of your continuous review and feedback loop, have your retro. If you think you don't need a retro, go in the retro and ask, why do we think we don't need the retro? So no way to really get around that. So yes, this is another myth that I want to sort out today. I think when I hear we don't have time or we don't know what to say in the retro, I instantly think, okay, are all your processes as best as they can? I'm pretty sure there's something that can be improved. Or, go in the retro and say what you're doing so great so you can celebrate. Okay, to summarize, I just wanted to connect the dots. This conference is about connecting. So set a goal before building anything, that whatever you build or do should be connected to a goal. And make sure that that goal is measurable, and the OKR are a good metric, are a good goal-setting framework because they embed the 2 things. In the Inception, make sure you know your personas, your stakeholders, dig into the solution, don't go down to the to the solution domain too early before having the whole picture, and the story mapping is a good framework to do that. Then Kickoff to help the team to gel earlier, easier, and get to the performance stage earlier. Forecast to manage expectation. Again, that's not a rigid roadmap. It should be updated and reviewed and discussed. And build and ship, yeah, I didn't say much about that, but there are frameworks for that. I think that's all from me. Also, time is not that bad, so questions?